Meanwhile, grains were higher today with corn trade 2 to 3 cents higher. Light buying action follows the lead of soybeans. Soybean trade 7
Ohio. For generations, Ohio has been known for its agriculture. It's a reputation that's been earned through hard work. It wasn't easy for previous generations, and it's not easy today. To help build a better future, Ohio farmers turn to the same partner they've counted on in the past, the Ohio Farm Bureau.
All right, thank you folks for all coming here tonight on really short notice. Give you an idea of how short this was. This setup meeting began planning just about exactly 7 days ago on Thursday afternoon. So, and as luck would have it, of course it was rainy and wet, everything was soaked, and then when we finally get around to having the meeting, sun's shining, 90 degrees, and people are at home trying to get some farming done. And I'm not going to say I'm glad to be here tonight, because I know from your standpoint, you're not glad to be here either when you think about the reason you're here, right? In other words, you're here because you almost have to be here to learn about the Prevent Plant. Well, I'm Randall Reeder, a retired extension ag engineer at Ohio State. And usually when I'm standing up here, it's Conservation Tillage Conference time. So how many of you have been to Conservation Tillage Conference before? At least more than half, I'd say. And of course, this is being sponsored by the Ohio No-Till Council. We organized it. Jan Lehman sent me an email last Thursday, and this program you're seeing tonight is a result of that. So I'm going to introduce Jan Lehman, president of the Ohio No-Till Council, to do a quick welcome.
Thanks, Randall. That's what precipitated this meeting. I think anybody that's from around here knows that we're in as hard a hit area as there is around. But this whole corner of Ohio, the northeast corner of Indiana, Joe, wherever Joe is, Joe's around somewhere back there. He said they consult on 240,000 acres over in Sherwood and Henry County over in that neighborhood, and said they think they got about 20,000 planted out of the 240,000 that they consult. So that tells you the kind of issue that we're facing here. The other thing it tells you the kind of issue that we're facing here is look how fast the rules are changing from crop insurance, FSA, and everybody else. Government don't work that fast, people. So that's kind of tells you that it's a serious issue. There's a lot of moving parts to this between tariff payments and cover crops and qualifications and the RMA and everything. So what we were hoping to do was Dave's idea was that let's keep them from planting something they shouldn't. Let's try to get them something that will help them. And then let's also try to keep you out of trouble with RMA, with FSA, with everybody else. So let's try to get some questions answered here. So what we intend to do tonight, if you got a question that's burning and that hasn't been talked about, please write questions down on the index cards. We're going to go through those first, and then we'll open it up for questions from the floor. So what most of these folks are going to do tonight is be resource people to answer questions. But thanks for coming. It's still a pretty good crowd, and like Gene said, on his way over here, there's a planter in every field between home and here. So had that not been the case, I think we'd have probably had a standing room crowd.
You just never get rain when you want it. That's the trouble. All right, Mark Badertscher is my co-partner on putting this thing together. We spent 2 or 3 hours last Thursday evening in his office, and he's going to share some questions and concerns and get this show underway. Mark?
Okay, thank you, Randall. As we know, there's lots of rules and lots of different sources of information, so we've tried to compile some of these things for that we want to get the message out. Extension's been working hard. We've had a lot of long conference calls trying to compile all this information, and some of the things that I want to point out to you are going to be up on this slide that is entitled More Thoughts. And one of the things that was brought up to me For those of you that might have agreements with NRCS through EQIP or CSP, if you do have EQIP or CSP contracts, if you plan to do anything different regarding cover crops than what's on your agreement, you need to get that pre-approved by NRCS before you plant. So that's important. Another thing that's come up is whether or not we can use GMO corn seed for a forage. So the answer to that question is most of the traits have been approved for forage and feed use. If you're using corn, for example, as a silage. However, you need to check your stewardship agreement and you need to check with your seed dealer to make sure that it's approved for that before you plant. If you use cover crops as a forage, make sure any herbicides that you use are approved for that use. Where do you go to find that? On the label. And it may not be on the label. So check into that before you use herbicides on forages that might be used for livestock feed. The approved agricultural expert in the county will approve any cover crops that are used in that county. That's usually the extension person or a university official. If you don't have one in your county, that could be a certified crop advisor, a certified professional agronomist, or some other type of person that would be considered an expert in your county. The other thing I wanted to mention that when you're talking about crop insurance and prevented planting rules, the federal crop insurance adjuster is the final say on prevented planting rules, no matter what you might hear from other people. If you are using leftover treated seed, for example, soybean, as a cover crop, you cannot just broadcast that on the surface. There are issues with birds and pollinators. So you need to either drill it, plant it, or bury that seed at least 1 inch in the soil with a disc or something. And finally, this is a big one, make sure you follow the cover crop recommendations for your state. So those are some things that I wanted to point out before we got too far into this, that some people wanted clarifications on that are hot topics. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Randall, and he's going to introduce our first speaker.
All right. We figured out one thing that you have to do regardless of cover crops or anything else is control the weeds. So we figured we had to have Jeff Stachler here. He's got his PhD in weed control, working under Mark Laux, and he's now the extension educator in Auglaize County. So, Jeff, we're going to have you talk for about 5 minutes and give us some basics. 10 minutes, excuse me. 10 minutes. You're on. So you can do it right there if you want to.
I'm just good. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Randall wanted me to talk a little bit about the weed situation. First of all, we need to get the weeds controlled as soon as possible in these prevent plant fields because the weeds are getting way too large. They're really beyond any label that we have at this point in time. So we've got to make sure that we're doing the best job possible when we're using herbicides to get them controlled, or else we could push the resistance issue that we already have enough of. So that's just the opening comment there. I want to make sure that we know there are 3 major methods to controlling weeds. One of the methods is to mow. That's probably the most time consuming, probably the least cost, and certainly will allow more weed seeds to be produced than any other strategy that's out there. Because you're going to run down the weeds, you're not going to get those mowed off, and the ones you're mowing off, you're not going to kill, right? So they're going to regrow, and you're going to have to keep mowing during the season. But that technically is an option, and just wanted to bring that up. Another option is tillage. And really, there's only 2 methods of tillage we now have available with the size of weeds that we have in our fields. And that is a disking at least twice and a moldboard plow. But obviously, those two strategies have negative ramifications with them as well, especially with soil erosion and creating compaction layers because of those two tillage practices. They're not very pleasant when it comes to soil, so we need to make sure that we're being careful about that. But those are the two tillage methods. Then the last one is the tried and true chemical method with herbicides, and that's where we have the most well, not the most options, I should say, but we can cover the fields very quickly. All programs, the base program needs to have glyphosate in it because we're trying to control all the weeds that are out there. And the right rate right now is anywhere from 1.5 to 2 pounds per acre of acid equivalent. So we've got to make sure that we're up at our high dosages, so that's 44 to 57 ounces of a Roundup branded product right now for glyphosate. Make sure that you have your ammonium sulfate in there when we're using the glyphosate. However, we need to be mixing some other things with it because of the resistant weeds that we have. Because glyphosate's not going to take care of mare's tail and giant ragweed and water hemp, and if you have palmer amaranth and common ragweed that are resistant to glyphosate. So one option is to throw Liberty in there. We're getting rather large weeds right now for Liberty to work well. So there's that limitation, and we need to be at the 43-ounce rate if we're going to use a Liberty formulation to make sure that we're getting the weeds killed that are out there. That's going to add quite a bit of money to the system. This is not going to be cheap to use the herbicides. It's probably going to be the most costly program to go after our weeds. The only limitation with the Liberty allows you openness as far as cover crops that will be destroyed. For forages, we have to go back to the label and read the rotation restriction. And I think it's 90 days, if somebody can correct me if I'm wrong or not. But you've got, I think, like 90 or 120 days that you have to wait for rotating to crops that are not on the label. And so that's a problem for cover crops for forages. The other two options, the next one is to add 2,4-D in at 1.5 quarts per acre with the glyphosate. The problem with that is that you have to wait before you plant certain cover crops. And if you're going to plant a legume cover crop, we should be out there at that rate at least 30 days for certain things, and for some we need to be out there probably 8 weeks for some of them. And then you still need to follow the label for forage type cover crops that you're planning to plant. And lastly, you've got dicamba, and that's going to be at 1.5 pints that we need to be using now. And that has limitations also with replanting. We've got to be concerned about that. It should be about 120 days for many things. Some things we can get away, grasses we can get away with less than that. 30 days will be enough for grasses, but again, it's supposed to be 120 days from a recrop standpoint. So you've got to take those things into consideration. And lastly, before you plant any cover crop, make sure that you know what herbicides you have used before you plant to make sure you're establishing something that's going to work. And no sense in buying some seed where things are not going to grow. So with that, I'll end my comments.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And like everybody else, he's going to be up here, so he'll be here to answer questions too. Talking to Joe Nestor on Saturday, he mentioned something that I seriously didn't think about. I'm not a fertility guy, but he's going to share with you the effect of all this rain and flooding that we've had and some of the things you have to be aware of in terms of soil fertility. Joe Nestor of Nestor Ag Management.
Thanks, Randall. I guess I don't have to tell you guys how tough it is, but it is in 40-some years. We've run into pockets before, maybe a small area that had some issues, but never this widespread. And so there's got to be some optimism here somewhere. All right. So I think if I can tell you a few things of what has happened in your soil, and then all these people up here are going to give you some tips on how to fix it too. But I I think there's some impression out there that things are as we left them last year. The only thing is we didn't get planted, and that's not so. You know, the biology is by far more important than the N, P, and K. And the biology has really taken it on the chin, and the reason is we've taken the air away from it. If you go back and think about how long this period has been, this started during harvest last year for a lot of us. So it's been a long time with no air and reduced air in the soil. So our organic matter has been diminished. The other thing that really concerns me is aggregate stability. And when you lay wet that long, we start losing that integrity of your aggregates. Now, no-till and conservation-tilled soils will be better. They will hold that stability longer than conventional tilled fields. But if you dig and look, a lot of those fields, even the no-till fields, that structure has diminished, and a lot of that silt and particles have moved, and they've not, you know, they're plugging pore space now. So that's one of the things that we'll need to address. I don't know if you guys noticed this or not, but I noticed the worst erosion this spring than I have seen in a long, long time. And it started in March. We had a partial thaw on the surface, and we got a heavy rain, and that started it flowing. And we checked some of that, sent to the lab, some of that residue that was washing. That's the good stuff that's leaving. You know, that's the stuff you work really hard for. So, as far as nutrients, we all know phosphorus leaches. I'm going to be real surprised if we don't have a significant bloom with the numbers that they've been getting, and you guys, most of you didn't put fertilizer on and get planted, but it's still going to happen. So phosphorus leaches. So that's one issue. And also continued saturation like we've had will actually weaken the charge of the soil, and nutrients like potash can become disassociated from the soil. So we can leach potash. Now maybe you didn't lose it completely, but maybe we've leached it beyond the root zone. So maybe we need to think some of this stuff like Dave does, and a way to pull that back up so it's useful for next year. So potassium is an issue, and also calcium. Calcium's fairly soluble, and it will move down through the profile for you. And when calcium drops, when pH drops, when we lose some calcium out of that top 8 inches that you're planning on as your main factory, we can't fill, it's tough to fill the exchange capacity of those soils at lower pHs and saturated levels. So we can give up and move around some of those nutrients. Some have left. I just ran a nitrogen mineralization test on a field next to my office that we did get corn planted. And on the field on the west side, we also got corn planted. One field had 2 tons of chicken litter last fall. There's absolutely no difference between the 2 fields in nitrogen level. So the 2 tons of chicken litter, the nitrogen component anyway, is either gone or way behind schedule. So, what's that? No, there was cover crop. There was cover crop. It was vertical tilled in twice with a cover crop, rye and barley combination. So there was cover crop on both of them. So now let's talk about some opportunities here. So first thing, don't think that everything is as you left it. So what a great opportunity to do some checking, keep your rotation with your soil sampling, because this year counts. This year may count more than it usually does. So keep that rotation. And we're also going to have, I'm hoping, an opportunity to apply lime, maybe apply gypsum, have some cover crops out there to help it work, help it get down into the soil, and apply some nutrients maybe this fall at a low-risk time after you've put a cover crop out there and after you've inventoried what you have. So those soils need to get back on track, they need growing roots, okay? So the cover crop is needed to start that recovery. If not, don't be surprised when your next year's crop is the beginning of the repair crop, because we got a lot of work to do. Where's Jeff? Weeds are not a cover crop, are they? They are detrimental. I mean, you guys look, even when you kill a weed, there's an effect around that weed where we lose crop around that weed. So we got to control the weeds. So I'm going to close here, and I'm just going to say, what's the worst thing that you could do? The worst thing you could do is nothing. So you got to start that repair process back, inventory what you've got there as far as soil test and lime and pH levels. And because if you decide to do nothing, we've already damaged your army out there, and now we're getting weather that we're going to bake the rest of them as they're trying to survive. So, Randall?
All right, stay close up here. I guess I miscounted on chairs because it's like musical chairs. You're going to have to knock somebody off, Joe. Yeah. But stay right there on the front row. We'll use you. All right. We passed out or made available 3x5 cards, and Alan is going to go down the middle. So if you've got questions on those, just pass them to the center, and Jan will help collect those also. The idea here is that we'll collect these figuring that several questions are going to be close or identical, and there's no use of having each of you standing up to answer the question, and we'll give those to the three cover crop guys up here mainly, and so they'll have them ahead of time and can figure out a good answer, we hope. We hope, yes, right? All right, at this time, let me see if this computer will work right, if I hit the right direction. Did I go too far? There's what I wanted. Maybe Brad already automatically moved it for me. Okay. Well, I want to introduce all these folks who are seated up here. We're really fortunate. Literally everybody that we had in mind to have as a resource person or presenter said, yes, we'll be here. So that worked out fantastic. Actually, Brad's dad said Brad would be here. But Brad Wingfield of Wingfield Crop Insurance. And as soon as I finish introducing everybody, we'll come back to him with that basic question of make sure everything fits in your insurance practice. Sarah Noggle, who's an extension ag educator in Paulding County, and she is going through a program on dealing with stress. Does anybody here feel stressed this year? Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. I know everybody is. So she'll have a few comments in a minute on that. And Jim Horman, who had a history of being extension here, but he's now NRCS soil health specialist for Ohio and Michigan. And he'll have some, if you have any question about soil health, I think the kind of comments that Joe Nestor made kind of fit in partly into that category. Anita Green, and I hadn't seen her for about 10 years, but she's here representing USDA FSA, and I told her the main thing will be to correct us if we say anything wrong or that's going to be against the regulations, and so she'll have some comments also. I've already heard from Jeff Stachler, and he'll be here to answer questions. Like Joe said, weeds are not a cover crop. So that's number one. Then we got Brad Miller, who's with DeKalb Asgrow, Bayer, and I won't even mention the M word, if that's okay. He doesn't have to deal with that. It's Bayer. It's Bayer, yeah. It's B-A-Y-E-R, or how do they say it in Europe? Bayer? Bayer? Anyway. Okay. So he's here with DeKalb Asgrow, and we'll probably have some questions for him and Justin, the next person here, about can you return seeds back to the companies? Justin Petrosino, former extension educator, now with Stewart Seeds. Probably several of you see his videos every once in a while that he does out in the field, very educational. Now we come to our three main cover crop folks. Cody Beacom with Bird Agronomics. And how long have you owned Bird Agronomics? That was Leon Bird, many of you remember from years ago.
Took it over 2 years ago and been in the business about 7-8 years.
All right. And so Cody's really doing a good job on cover crops as well. Dwight Clary, Clary Farms, also into cover crops. And once we get him on the microphone, he has some good comments to make, kind of overview. And maybe the best known cover crop guy and no-till farmer around from Walnut Creek Seeds, David Brandt from Fairfield County, and he's immediate past president for about a dozen years of the Ohio No-Till Council. So with that, okay, if I remember what I'm supposed to be doing here. Sarah, you've got some comments to make on handouts and other things relating to stress.
Okay, so first I want to say I'm here with each one of you, and OSU Extension is here to support each one of you. As I look out across the crowd, I want to say this one thing. Take a deep breath right now. Because I can see some faces and I can see some stress, so everyone take a deep breath in real quick. Because it will make you feel a little bit better. Monday I wrote in the Corn newsletter, an article from the heart, and I come from a family of farmers. I'm surrounded by them here in Northwest Ohio. And I know those stresses that each one of you are feeling. And we're not here to give you sympathy, but we're here to empathize with each one of you. Down in the lobby, I brought some resources that we have available. OSU Extension, we are working on our task force for farm stress. But I need you to know that we have 3 of us that are trained through Michigan State, and Beth Sheckelhoff, she's out at the back of the room, myself and Eric Rieker, and we're here to work with each and every one of you. The one thing I want to say is, you're probably here because you care. And we know that, and we see that in your faces. But I'm worried more about those people who aren't here. And I want to make sure that you're checking on those farm neighbors. You're checking on them. We need each and every one of you to feed America and feed the world. And you're an important part of that. So with that, I'm going to not spend a lot of time, but I will be here as a resource tonight if you have questions, concerns. It's not all rainbows and unicorns, like I said Monday, and there's a lot of hard decisions being made. So again, we're here for you, and if you need anything, please see me afterwards.
All right, and Beth, raise your hand back there in the back corner. She and Sarah are both trained, I guess would be the right word, to deal with stress and other issues that you might be dealing with, or maybe you have a family member or a neighbor who needs some help dealing with their severe stress.
Randall, that's what I wanted to point out. Please watch your neighbors and your friends. The people that generally need help won't ask for it.
Yeah. Jan's making the point, since he doesn't have a microphone on, that pay attention to your neighbors and be very aware of them and make sure they get help if they show signs of needing help. All right, where's Alan? Well, while Alan's, okay. Seemed like the number one question and issue is, all right, if I plant cover crops, and there may be some, what cover crops are going to plant, but what's the effect on crop insurance? Anybody have that concern? Yeah, crop insurance, what's going to happen with it? So Brad Wingfield is going to share some comments on that right now, and then we'll get started with the other cover crop questions. So go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm glad only 3 people raised their hand on that question, so I won't be so busy tonight. Yeah. I'm Brad Wingfield. My father's in the back there. Randall mentioned earlier, and Dave Colley here's from our AIP as well. The big question I'm getting this year, right this week and last week, is what can you do? Things were very fluid here for the last 14 days. I think there's a lot more clarity to, the biggest question I get is, can you put corn for silage as a cover crop? And so basically that RAIP has looked at it, everything, and High State has something that they put out, said that as long as you're 22 inches rows or smaller and 40,000 population or greater, that would be considered a cover crop to be able to be harvested for silage after September 1. So September 1's a big date for everybody. Obviously, if you go before that date, that affects everything. So that's your line of demarcation is the September 1. After that's your crop. We were up here talking before we started. People were asking, could you take and sell that silage to the dairy? Once that's, after September 1, it's your crop to sell to the dairy or whatever you so choose on that. As far as the list of cover crops that are acceptable on that, that's a list that is not it's not compiled by RMA or by the crop insurance companies. That is a list by, like Mark was talking about, your local agronomist there. One of the things to add on to that local agronomist side of things that I have noticed is that they specifically exclude anybody that has a financial vested interest as the expert. That is kind of one of the big points there, that if they sell the cover crop seed, they would be, from the way that we read it, they're excluded from that as the expert from there. So they're looking for someone from like an extension or university or something like that is to provide those lists there. But those are the big questions there. But you can put them on behind the prevented beans or prevented corn. That was another question we get. Where can you put that silage or that corn for silage to be harvested after September 1? So those are a lot of the big questions we get this week over and over again. I'm sure that there's going to be a ton of other questions out there. There is some stuff right now. Another one that I'll go over is late plant period. That may be something that'll come up here, what you can do in that late plant period, when it is. So everybody kind of knows the general rule of thumb for crop insurance, or the last day to plant corn timely is the 5th, and the last day for beans is the 20th. But the late plant period for corn just ended yesterday, was the first day that you could go, and it ended on the 25th. But beans are the July 15th. So there are some different things you can do in your late plant period on prevented beans still. You're still in that late plant period there. But those are kind of some of the big dates there. They changed a couple years ago, so if people are thinking that the corn was a little longer, that was a change, I think 2 years ago or something like that. So, but it's now the 25th on there. So those are some of the big things. So.
Okay.
All right.
Ready for
Great.
starting with crop insurance questions. We have a fall planted cereal rye as a cover crop that is now on prevent plant acres. Can you harvest this for seed?
Nope.
Not at any time.
Nope, not for seed.
Not for
Nope,
seed.
you can now, up through, if it's prevented beans, and that's where I was talking about that, the late plant period. If it's on for seed, no. But for prevented, you could be hay grazed, or chopped for silage on a prevented bean acre field through the 15th. You still have option on that late plant period there.
Alan, can we follow up on that?
Yep.
So is there any talk on that? Because our rye now is dead.
Yep.
We've got anywhere from 25 to 60 bushel pounds of rye that's out there, that if we're going to look and see on what we're going to do for the following years, I mean, we're going to wipe ourselves out for any wheat crop because of, any rye that comes back up. I mean, the only thing we're going to be able to do is continue to disc and spray, or we're going to have a real problem with that. Is there any talk of anything being able to help with that? I mean, we're not looking to sell it, but if we don't get it off, we're going to have some residual problems for the next 4 or 5 years.
I mean, the question is there any future relief to a cover crop that was planted last fall, is that what we said? And it's there. On the speculation, I mean, there's I probably get, I don't know, maybe half my questions are about speculation. How does, one of the big questions I get is will, preventive planning go to 90%? That's another big question there. And nothing like that is it's rumored, but nothing like that is set in stone. On the speculation of that, you're not going to be docked on your preventative or anything like that from that point of view if it reseeds itself as a cover crop there. And then you go back and follow the rules after September 1, but not in that period there.
So you could
take
harvest
it.
the seed but not do anything with it, just destroy it and make straw probably, couldn't you, right?
So, would we be able to do that in order to get 60 ton of rye off of our field and still be okay?
Yeah, we talked about that on the way over, actually, on the drive over there. There's some economics to this where, depends what that value of that crop is, we've had people look at harvesting that as a commodity, because that commodity may be north of the preventive planning, payment there. So, that's a individual economics there, where you're at on there.
All right, we've got a question back here too.
I've got cereal rye was supposed to go to soybeans, but it's not. I want to wait till the cereal rye, which was planted back October, has made heads, and then can I come in like after July 15th with a chopper and chop that their cereal rye down, and the heads will shatter, the seeds will be on the ground, and then can I incorporate it in with a accelerator or something like that, or a Phillips rolling harrow, and then it will start to establish another cover crop for this summer, fall, winter, into next spring.
So to recap that question, you basically want to cut it to let it reseed itself
Yeah,
after July 15th.
yes.
The one thing that I'll go ahead and preference right here is that a lot of these, I'm getting questions that are like that. These rules for crop insurance did not exist 3 weeks ago. It wasn't like that. This is, I've been in crop insurance for 21 years almost, and it's not like we went to class after class and they drilled this into your head here. So we take into each of those individual questions and we run them up the flag there. I've asked the question about, that crop reseeding itself and being considered a crop and continuing on, and that's fine. No one's asked me yet if they can go out and chop it after the 15th, let it and disc it back in to reseed it. I would assume that would probably fall into the kosher side of things, but that would be one of the questions I would ask your agent about and run it up the flag. And that's what I've been doing. I've been getting questions, and I'm like, great question. Let me find a definitive answer for you, and I usually can find a definitive answer before the end of the day. So.
Okay, Brad, I don't know whether it's a definitive answer, but Dave Brandt has a comment.
Good.
Oh, you don't? All right. Nobody has the answer. Yeah. Did you answer this? If you're collecting money for a prevent plant and you grow a cover crop, can you sell it?
Can you sell it after the first?
After September 1st.
Yeah, that's fine. It's your crop. You can, chop it for chop it for silage, baleage. You can hay it, you can graze it, you can baleage, you can chop. You got choices after that, but it's after September 1.
So that's.
Wait here. That's one of the questions. Let me tag onto that right there. One of the questions that they're asking about is, can you sell it? One of the huge no-nos is renting your prevented ground out to someone else to do something on. Well, that's black and white. No. Can't do that.
All right. Alan, you got another question there?
Yeah, we're trying to. So here, I'm not sure if this crop insurance, we have corn that is in terrible shape, probably a crop failure. And they want to leave it stand, so can we plant cover crops through a standing corn crop, a young corn crop?
So, question is, you got a bad corn crop and you want to put a cover crop to it. Basically, you're going to, again, call your agent and you're going to ask them to come out and appraise it before you do. So anything you do to a standing crop needs to be appraised before you can do anything to it, including replant any crop. So they're going to come out and appraise it, and they'll release it to you. So then you can do what you want to do on that, and it'll go for a final payment on that.
Okay. Anita Green.
I'm going to intervene just a little bit because I don't want you guys to move down the road and then come in to do an acreage report or not report the changes. And there's a few things that you need to know. The acreage reporting deadline, July 15th. Most FSA offices are booked into the 20th of July already because you guys backed up 2 months, we're backed up 2 months. And so just expect that you're going to get an appointment. And at that point, you got two things. You're always reporting your initial crop intention. Remember, you got some programs out there that are going to be looking at initial crop. And then subsequent crop or following another crop has to be reported by the acreage reporting deadline, or if it is planted after that date, being July 15th, you have 15 calendar days to report that subsequent crop. All cover crops, everything must be reported. The reason for that is the intended use. And we have 4 different types of cover crops that we'll be listing as. But that also then makes certain that you are in compliance, not only with RMA, but with FSA. And when we, most of the counties here in Ohio, Northwest Ohio, all FSA offices, their county emergency boards, which consist of county committees, all USDA partners, local partners, extension, soil and water, those folks have gathered information requesting disaster designations. We look at different types of designations for physical losses that may be administrator type designations. We have secretarial presidential designations. If you've looked at the ad hoc legislation that you see through the flood areas of Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, certainly then the hurricanes and wildfires, those were presidential and secretarial designated areas. The language that followed that was not only to provide funding for those, but and other secretarial or presidential designated areas. Ohio likely will have some counties that will certainly be designated that. And whether or not they use the discretion of that ad hoc legislation to apply it to other states and counties, or Congress comes in and appropriates more money under that, or that opened the gate for a secondary ad hoc piece of legislation. It's almost like once you have something in one part of the country, someone else is going to be knocking on the door for the other part of the country. So what I want you to understand is it's very important that if you have filed with crop insurance, you also want to make certain that you file those intentions with FSA. We have certain rules for what is initial crop, what's a subsequent crop, what's a double crop. Some of those are able to be paid under ad hoc disaster. So just want to caution that 15-day period is going to be really important that you make that phone call. You're not probably going to get in the door, but it extends that timeliness for that acreage reporting.
Let me add on to that real quick. She just mentioned that July 20th is, some of these FSAs are booked out through that, and that some FSA counties will maybe extend. I can guarantee you that crop insurance will not extend past July 15th. So I don't say never, that's a good point. Never say never when you're talking about something with the government programs, I get that. But in the 30-some years, they've never extended a deadline for that. So our deadline's still July 15th, and so if you are done planting for the first time, you have prevented, I highly encourage you to get to your crop insurance agent, because just like that they're sitting with this backlog of paperwork, getting in there and getting that timely would help everybody out too.
Okay, we got some certified crop advisor clipboards. You want to explain?
No, it's all right. We'll just pass them around, sign in for CUs.
This is only for certified crop advisors.
Yeah, certified crop. Let's raise your hand if you're going to get credit for as a crop consultant, CCA credits. All right, that'll get around pretty quick then. Good.
All righty, I got a question over here.
This kind of goes back to one of your earlier comments, Brad, regarding planting of that cover crop in corn, for instance. Is there a stipulation on the date or how late you have to wait depending on the PP crop that you took? Do you have to wait till after the end of the late planting period, or
Are-
just
is it-
clarify
is it-
that.
Yeah, so just to clarify your question, are we talking about prevented here?
Yes.
Okay, prevented, you can go out there and put that, you can go out there now for your cover crops,
Regardless of which crop. you
regardless of PP beans
Okay.
and PP corn.
Okay, okay. And just one other real quick thing. So how are you personally handling the July 15th date versus that? And making sure you have those PP acres accurate?
Yep.
On guys switching crops and field and everything else?
So her question was how we handling the, our July 15th deadline. So over the last 10 or 15 years, probably, basically the vast majority of the AIPs are the insurance companies out there. They have went very digital. And so I can see a lot of what FSA does on a near real time. For people getting stuff in. The only thing that I may see a difference is I can plant from last year's CLUs. If they do change from last year's to this year, I could still, that would be considered certified and be correct. It may not match this year's 100% because they may do that after the 15th, but basically technology is what the summation of that is.
I don't know if anybody can answer about MFP, where status if you plant or don't plant. Probably nobody in the panel. Can you address it all?
I think everyone had, through different farm publications, Secretary Perdue's announcement that the MFP program will be paid on planted acres. The distinction is that is a discretionary program. It is not a legislated program. MFP pulls out a Commodity Credit Corporation's trust fund, and that's very restricted where those funds and how they can be used. And specifically, it has to be used for such things as trade or promotion of trade and some conservation, some other types of unfair practices and different things that may occur and surpluses. With that said, he made it fairly clear, I think, that prevented planted in of itself would not be legal. It wouldn't pass WTO. We got folks watching very closely at MFP, the Market Facilitation Program. So that's why they decided this time that because it was going to be announced ahead of harvest while you were planting, that they could not somehow manipulate or cause you to change your planning intentions because of an MFP program. With that said, the MFP will be paid on planted acres across the nation. So the X number $1 billion will look at planted acres by every state. Every state will get their pot of money based on the acres. Every crop having the same payment rate. Very important you understand. Soybeans will not be paid more than triticale. It won't be paid more than alfalfa. It won't be paid more than rye. Won't be paid more than oats. It'll be paid, if you have an acre of oats, it's going to be paid the same as an acre of corn or soybeans. Every county will get its allocation. Then every farmer will get an allocation to their planted acres based on that. I suspect that they will still have an enrollment period because they're not going to give money to someone that didn't ask for it. That's about as simple as it gets. There are many people that don't want payment, if you will, or they just don't stay up on things and miss the boat. Prevented planted, it was alluded to that there would be could be a minimum payment if you planted a cover crop that was a list of the covered commodities that are being paid MFP. I'm not so certain that they'll go down that road if they weren't intended to be harvested again, because you got silage that was determined not eligible because it does not hit a foreign market. Remember, this is to mitigate and export. So it's really important that everyone not count on that. Don't count that you're going to get an MFP payment necessarily on prevented planting. If you do, it will be minimum, and you can all anticipate whatever that may be. And at this point, who knows?
It's a good answer. Who knows? I don't know if...
Alan, everybody that wants CCA, get one. Everybody get a chance to sign.
I'm not sure who can address, but previously we talked about using corn for silage and requirements of the row spacing and the population. I guess that's set in stone, or who's the final rule on that? Is it 22 inches and 40,000 plus, or is there any leeway?
You know, I kept, the big question I got after that kind of, you know, ruling came out that we interpreted, our AIP did, that everybody was like, well, what, I got 30 inch? And I'm like, no. I mean, I basically told them flat, black and white, I'm like, 30 inches does not count. So now you can go back and so those guys that had 30, they were going, they were doing 30 and going back and splitting it again is what their plan was tomorrow. So that's fine, as long as it is. And the other question I got was about the 40,000. Where the leeway on that is. It's 40,000 and greater, from everything that we're reading. That's planted. Obviously, if it comes up a little light of that, I don't think that anybody's, you know, that's not going to be an issue from what comes up out of it, but just planted.
Okay, Joe, manure on prevent plant. General recommendations, or how do you approach putting manure out there? You know, a good sequence of agronomics on that.
Well, that'd be one of those opportunities that I was talking about, because you ought to be able to put manure out there at a low-risk time, you know, when you guys know it's going to quit raining here sometime. So a low-risk time when you can get a good cover crop on it, and it has time to get into the soil for you and be part of next year's program before it would go on late and be risky. So I think that's a real good, the guys that have manure ought to have ground to put it on, low risk time, but I would surely get that cover crop on it. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that would be, I would bet there'll be some decent buys on manure out there, because I think everybody's full, so.
Our P levels and our manure test, watching total
Right.
loads there.
Right. Now, so let's address that P level thing. You know, we've done a lot of work with phosphorus, and I really feel that technology and the way you guys farm now has really improved efficiencies on nutrients compared to what we used to have many years ago. And we see some modest phosphorus levels perform very well. So I would not take this time to say, we're gonna slug manure on here and we're gonna really build this phosphorus level up. I don't see any benefit in it. I see some fantastic crops being produced at 20 to 25 parts per million phosphorus. I see below that yielding 200 plus bushel corn that it would say you couldn't do that. But the practices that you use, the hybrids that you have, the planters we have, all those management things that we have today that we didn't used to have 30 years ago is getting some great efficiency. So manure would be a great tool, managed right, but again, one of those things where you don't need to overdo it. We can't afford to overdo it here this year.
So know your soil test, know your manure test, and know what your
Correct.
rates should be then. Okay. So Jeff, a couple herbicide questions, and we'll get into more cover crop stuff. Roundup and Liberty together.
Yeah, so we can put those two herbicides together. There's nothing wrong with that. We still don't have enough data out there across the country to know exactly when we will or will not have antagonism that will occur. So that is a possibility to happen with those two herbicides with the large weeds that we have out there right now. You know, we've got to take that chance right now because we've got to get the weeds killed if you're going to choose the Liberty as that option.
Jeff, at what kind of rates? You threw out some big rates there on Roundup and Liberty by themselves. What kind of rates would you say, are you still saying those high rates if you combine them?
Yeah, so that question with the rate structure there is that it's unfortunate that we're going to have to choose the high rate for both of them. Because if you have a mare's tail plant that's out there that's now 24 inches tall, Liberty is not... 4 inches tall? Yeah, right. Right. That's not a labeled application anymore to control that with Liberty, and so you're going to have that 43 ounces to get the job done. And again, unless you know for sure your field is susceptible to glyphosate, again, I don't want to get the point across that you can use just glyphosate alone, because most fields have resistant weeds in them to glyphosate today. So we really can't afford to just use that unless you're 100% sure that it's going to work.
Question about Sonic. At a 4-ounce rate, can you plant cover crops after that herbicide?
So Sonic was applied this spring then? Is that the question? At 4 ounces? If it was applied this spring, I would not plant any cover crop immediately. And we would need to think about it as if it's a normal usage, as if soybeans were there. And so we need to be thinking about that fall time frame to plant a cover crop in there. There's some scientific wiggle room in there. You know, a grass crop is going to do pretty good, but there's a lot of risk involved.
Okay. Probably more crop insurance, which we have a lot of wheat. It was intended to be destroyed, never got destroyed. It's still there. I claimed it as a loss. I planned to plant soybeans, never got killed. Can I harvest for seed this fall in the straw off that?
Can you harvest the wheat that was from last fall? But yes, you can, but you're not going to take Prevented on that then.
You can't take Prevent.
Yeah, if you want to choose that path over the other one, you could do that. Yeah, if that's what they're, I guess I don't know what the question exactly.
So what other recommendations would you do for bad stands of wheat that never got nitrogen or anything done? What should we do with that now, I guess?
I mean, you can the wheat can be prevented they have options here. They can prevent it or they can harvest it.
So if you prevent it, but it's almost ready to go to seed.
I don't think you can do both on that, is what I don't think. But you can't do both. You pick your, yeah.
I'm going to interject just a sec, because it was my understanding that this was wheat planted for wheat.
Right.
So what did you do last December 15th? You certified wheat intentions. So your crop is wheat, okay? And you filed failed acreage either with crop insurance or with us, or both. And so now you can go to a subsequent crop. If you, in fact, decide to harvest that, 576's failed acreage cannot be withdrawn. The first initial crop is wheat, which would make the second crop not insurable. If you harvest wheat from a crop insurance, if it was appraised, then the actual production would have to be turned in essence, if you filed a claim on that, because it's the higher of, and it's going to be higher harvested probably than what it was appraised at. So you would have to turn in that actual production. With FSA, you're going to record your actual. If you filed failed and you're going to turn around and harvest it, you're going to make just certain that you know that it's harvested. There's no subsequent acres. If there's an ad hoc program, wheat history for basis, we're going to be doing 2 years. You're going to be electing swinging basis again. That comes in every farm bill now, so you're keeping that wheat history. You can't, after the acreage reporting date, you may not revise.
So I'm going to tell you something else you have to be concerned about: the wheat and the cereal rye if you don't harvest it. Slugs and voles. Slugs and voles are really going to be attracted to that broadcast cereal rye or wheat. They both love it. Also, if you've got a lot of earthworms, they have a tendency to pull a lot of that seed right down their holes, and then you got 10 or 15 plants coming out one hole. We've seen that quite often. So not to complicate it, but that's another thing you got to think about. So we're in a low year a little bit because of the weather we had. We're in the kind of the rebound. But that doesn't mean that there aren't isolated fields out there. I mean, maybe Curtis can address this. I know Curtis is in the audience, but there are some pest issues out there that you probably got to be thinking about also, what impact that might have. Just something to think about. I'm just raising it as a warning. I'm not telling you what to do with these other programs, but something you might want to think about.
Well, here's a good one to start the cover crop talk on. I can't afford cover crops. So is it better to keep chopping the weeds than to do tillage? How bad's that gonna be on the microbes and everything? Dave, you got a comment on that?
Well, I think you can always afford a cover crop because what you'll see is better soil improvement. You'll see less erosion. You'll find some nutrients being pulled up from that cover crop that was down below the profile. And I think, as a whole, you're better off spending that, whatever it costs per acre, from 25 to 35 bucks an acre to get that cover out there. Because if we can do that, we can eliminate some of the erosion that we're seeing at the present time.
So Dwight, do you know much about triticale? You've heard triticale is twice as many roots as cereal rye, and it's shorter. Describe triticale, I guess.
Well, triticale is a cross between wheat and cereal rye, and I believe it's a fairly similar plant. One of the benefits of it, I guess, is better feed value. But I think it has very similar plant structure. That's kind of what I would say on that.
Okay. So the best cover if you're going to wheat or barley in the fall. Cody, we don't have much time. Can we get anything in between now and planting wheat or barley?
Yes. So a couple of options there. You could go on the cheap spectrum, or you could go on the more extensive spectrum. If you're wanting to go on the cheaper end of things, you could just use oats, radishes, and even some leftover soybeans. Pretty easy, pretty reasonably priced. If you really want to push things, I would suggest adding sun hemp in the mix. It's a little more expensive, but you've got dime-sized nodules, so you're going to fix a lot of nitrogen. And one point I'll make on that with legumes in general, right now, every single person in here, every single breath that you're making, you're breathing, you are inhaling 78% nitrogen. Let's put that to work, folks. I mean, simply put, let's use plants in our field that are going to fix that nitrogen in the soil and use it to our benefit in the future.
Okay. Brad Miller, you know much about milo? Can we, silage use of milo, availability, companies' situation on milo?
I'm going to defer to Justin.
So I did my master's out in Kansas State, so I probably have a little bit more.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
So availability is going to be the hard part. A lot of your traditional seed companies are not going to have access to milo, sorghum, and I guess the big question is, what do you want to use it for? I sent out an email to my dealers that there's 5, 6 types of sorghum. There's forage sorghum, there's sweet sorghum, there's grain sorghum, there's Sudan grass, there's Sudex mixes. So of all those, grain sorghum is probably the worst for a forage crop. The others have not been dwarfed. The grain sorghum we dwarfed in breeding, so it's a much smaller, more compact plant. And the conditions it likes are hot and dry. So we have tried to dink around with some at Perrysburg, Ohio, in a year. I don't want to jinx us all, but if the rain is turning off, that's a very good forage option. But I'd probably defer to one of the true forage sorghums or a sweet sorghum rather than a grain sorghum.
Okay. So Brad, another question then. Treated soybeans, your company's policy, return, planted as cover, recommendations, what to do with these treated soybeans.
Right, so if you have treated soybeans on the farm, the best thing to do is plant them. Yes, sir. So, so you can talk with your seed dealer where you purchased the seed to see what options there are, but they cannot be returned to the company. So the best thing to do is to plant those soybeans. Other people have asked about storing the seed till next year. That is an option, but it's a pretty risky option. To store seed, you need to have ideal conditions for storage. You have to have 50 degrees temperatures and 50% relative humidity, so a controlled environment. And of course, a lot of us don't have that on the farms. So again, the best thing to do with treated soybeans is to get them planted. And I like the idea about using soybeans in part of that cover crop with the grass, because that's another legume that can fixate nitrogen.
One thing we want to remember, folks, if you recall back in the winter, a lot of this soybean seed germ was pretty weak to start with. And they got it treated and got it up to a respectable level, but don't expect it to carry over into next year at those levels. We always carry a few over, and they'll grow. But our germ was already pretty weak this year. This is probably not a good year to carry them over.
Yeah, there's been studies on carrying over soybeans. If you just keep them in a warehouse without controlled temperature, that germ can drop to only about 20%. So you're taking a big risk.
Not a good year to carry a lot of them over at any rate.
Okay, Dave, I don't know if I'm going to plant corn or soybeans on this ground next year. That's prevent plant, but I want to put a cover out. What would you recommend if you're not sure about next year?
Well, I guess in that case, I would look at some grasses, warm season grasses to start with. Maybe put one clover in or one legume plant so it doesn't build a lot of nitrogen. Because if we put beans in a field that's had lots of legumes in it, they tend to get tall and lanky and lazy and don't produce. So, the best thing to do is try to do that. Maybe plant some rye in that with that mix so it'll be green come spring. But I would put some warm season grasses so they would winter kill and probably use a reddish with that so it would also winter kill.
Okay, Dwight, what could we do to try to get some of this potash or phosphorus that Joe was talking about was low? What covers would help with that to recycle it?
Well, I think one of the guys that are basically corn and bean producers, you have an opportunity this year to plant mixes that guys put out after wheat harvest. And those blends can do incredible things for you. Yes. So you have a diversified root system. You have deep tillers, you have deep fibrous roots. You have topsoil builders, you have plants that'll scavenge phosphorus, you have plants that'll produce nitrogen. So it kind of goes along with that question that was asked earlier about he couldn't afford a cover crop. And I agree with Dave, he can't not afford a cover crop. And one of the things about cover crops I find is it's a matter of information. So when you're getting information, don't go down to the local coffee shop and talk to somebody that failed doing it one time. Talk to somebody that's got experience, help you do it successfully. Yes. Because on our farm, I consider the cover crop the most valuable crop I grow. So root variety, different types of plants, deep roots, shallow roots, that type of a system will do you a lot of good, bringing nutrients and micronutrients up to you.
I'm not sure the seed guys or cover crop guys, but if you have bin run soybeans, you still have some in the bin, or you can get some of these treated soybeans. Which way do you go? Just go with the cheapest? Does it matter? Is there an advantage if you have a choice between bin run or using some of this treated stuff?
I'll trade them some.
You trade them? Okay.
Well, I guess one point of clarification I would make is that if it's a biotech trait, soybeans from last year's harvest that are in your grain bin, those cannot be used as a cover crop or otherwise because the technology license agreement that we sign allows for a one-time use, and that would be last year's planting. Now, non-GMO soybeans in the bin might be an option. There could be patents on that too, okay. Yeah.
So be careful of the traded seeds that are in your bin. It's not legal, right?
And just remember, the ones in the bins probably got some giant ragweed seeds and cocklebur seeds and foxtail seeds. So I would be advised that you make sure that at least you got them cleaned or make sure there's nothing in there before you plant them because there's no use to build that seed bank with a cover crop.
Hey, NRCS, Mark or Eric, any comments you want to make at this time? We had a question about, they heard about Michigan's program, $30 an acre. Anything going you can announce yet or not? It's up to you.
There'll be a newsletter article going out tomorrow around noon to the different media. As of Monday morning, we will commence a cover crop sign. As of Monday morning, we will commence a cover crop sign up. We have secured roughly $4 million to move forward with that. It will be open to all 88 counties. as everybody at the panel says, everything is fluid. It may be firming, I'll say it's firming up, but everything is still fluid. Our folks will do their best to meet with you and answer the questions you've got. We've got other programs that are in existence. And one thing I will stress, it's kind of been touched on up here by Anita and Brad. When you are asking questions, make sure that you're asking the appropriate people. Our NRCS folks out there aren't schooled to answer crop insurance questions or Anita's prevent plant. They're not necessarily schooled, or they're not schooled to answer questions related to EQIP. So, the coffee shop, as Jan said, is not the place to be getting your information. The stress that was talked about doesn't need to be compounded by getting an answer from the person that is not responsible for that answer. And a lot of times people have the initial impulse to make an answer, and then 3 days or 4 days later, you determine that you asked the wrong person. So we do have a program coming out. We met today with our district conservationist to lay out how we're going to roll that out, and we're going to push that out Monday. So if you're interested in receiving some funds to seed cover crops, move to our office or go to our office and sign up. We are going to have a 500 acre limitation on the contracts that we do, which equates to about $15,000. So if there's any additional follow-up questions, I can handle those. So.
I'd like to add one thing on there, and I'm double checking on it right now, but we started earlier talking about corn for silage on PP acres, but beans prevented during the late plant period, that's a question that I'm not exactly, I just texted to see where the answer is on that one. But beans on corn prevented is different than beans during this late plant period. So I'm not exactly sure that you can go out and just put beans on your prevented beans right now during this through July 15th.
Until after the 15th.
After the 15th, right. So I think that's the way that I just want to get clarified on that, but that's the way that I remember reading that one. So be careful on that one.
Yep, Ohio Country Journal, you have some supply and demand you're helping with. You want to talk about that a minute? Get you on camera.
Yeah. Gotta make sure I'm squared up to the camera. Good. It'll probably be broken by the time I get back over there. So I'm Joel from Ohio AgNet, Ohio's Country Journal. The video from tonight will be up online immediately after this. Thanks to Ohio Farm Bureau Federation for sponsoring this, as well as the Ohio No-Till Council for putting all this together. So if you know some friends or you yourself want to watch and recap some of this information, guys, if you got it wrong, let me know so we can adjust it before. I'm just kidding, they didn't get anything wrong. So it will be up there. Also, what he was referring to is just today, we started this little farmer-to-farmer network online at ocj.com. If you go there, it's just a place there. If you have some prevented plant ground that you're putting cover crops on, you can't rent that out, as Brad said. No renting that out. Brad's my crop insurance agent, so we can talk about that later, right? No renting it out. But if you do want to say, hey, I don't have any hay baling equipment or anything like that. I need some more information on that from guys that are around me. Or if you're somebody who says, I do need some forage come on or after September 1st later this year, I just need to get in contact with somebody in my area. There's 2 different forms at ocj.com there, the same place. If you go there, it's right at the top of our home page. You can go there, fill that out. We'll try to get you in contact with somebody after that. After that, it's all in between you guys. We're just there to start that conversation. But we hope you do check that out, ocj.com once again, and this video will be up at ocj.com, as well as the Ohio Farm Bureau website and both of our Facebook pages. So thank you guys for that little shout out.
Okay, Joel, I think that's going to be a great service. So with that, I think, Jan, we got through all the cards. We're going to open it up.
I got it. Yeah, we can. I have a question from back in the crowd for whoever. This is probably a Brad question. If they were to plant soybeans on PP acres after the late plant period, And after September 1, can they be chopped for silage?
Yes.
Okay. There's your answer to that question. So,
So
I
we've
guess
tried to
with-
get through some of the highlights, some of the common questions, but
One
we can
more
follow up.
One
So-
more before we do, I'll ask our seed suppliers here, talk to us a little bit about supply of what's short, what's not available, what's not going to be available, and what is plentiful or at least available.
Well, right now, Sudan sorghum seems to be fairly tight. The rest of the things that we sell seem to be pretty well. I think there is some rye out there. I think there's going to be a pretty decent crop in some places, but I think the acres were down that was planted, so that might be something you need to look at. But as far as other things like legumes and stuff, there's a pretty good supply of that at the present time. Now, that could change tomorrow, of course, but.
Do you want to share what you shared over there at supper time from your supplier's email this morning?
Well, the suppliers are just raising the price, guys. I mean,
Sooner rather than later if you're
Yeah.
going to buy something.
Right. That's the only thing I can tell you, Our suppliers sent us a note saying things were going up quite a good little bit, so.
Mark's got another comment.
So on that sooner rather than later, one of the things that we are doing, you provide an application to us, when you go in and sign up, you'll also be requested to, or you'll want to fill out a letter stating that you want to commence, which if you're going to go ahead, you need to wait until after you've signed up to place that order for cover crops in order to be eligible, which it's a rule that we have. You need to fill out that letter. Our state conservationist will provide a letter back to you stating that it's okay to commence with the full understanding that if we run out of funds, which we're not going to be able to cost share with everyone, you've done so at your own risk. But it's important that you make that request to commence that practice before you know you've got a contract if you're going to go ahead and secure seed.
Hey, Mark, tell everybody who you are.
I'm Mark Smith. I'm the State Resource Conservationist for NRCS here in Ohio.
Is there a question on that directly?
Okay, well, it has a question to do with the quality of seed. We have seen that the Indiana Chemist Office stated that they had, on the samples of rye from southern Indiana, that 90% contained Palmer amaranth last year.
Yes.
Now, we all don't want to plant that crap. Believe me, it's a nightmare and a half. Which I planted in my CRP ground to plant seed that was said to be clear of it. So I know where the nightmare is personally. You don't want to go there. What is the time period from when you acquire the seed so that you know that you are not planting primary noxious weeds such as that? Or what type of dealer will stand behind the product that they sell?
So Cody, you got any seed tags that spell some of that out with noxious weeds and cover crop seed, or?
By the way, if the bag is open, the tag means nothing. You cannot sue over it.
Yeah, you gotta buy a bag or mini bulk, right?
No, it's, anything that's been open, it is your problem, not the supplier's problem. He can tell you to go, you know what?
Okay, let's get an answer now.
I think as a consumer, your best bet is just simply keep tabs on your seed tags, have a good relationship with your seed supplier, and just ensure they're getting their seed from a quality source. I think that's the single best advice I could give anybody in this room. You don't want to buy weed seed basically, and that's just going to cause more problems. Do you guys have anything else to add with that?
Well, there's a lot of rye that's locally produced. You want to watch that. We try to get our rye from up north in either Michigan or Canada to avoid problems like that. But if you're buying it from a local farmer, if he doesn't go through the proper steps, you run the risk of not getting a quality product also. Not that they didn't grow something nice, but maybe it wasn't cleaned and tested properly.
Question.
Yeah.
Jim,
So-
let's let Jim go ahead.
Yeah, so when you get your seed tested, make sure you go to the added expense and don't buy seed unless it says that it's been tested in all 50 states.
Right.
If you go, a lot of this seed, where they're testing the seed is done in Illinois, and they don't always list, especially Palmer isn't listed. That's what we were told at CTC last year when we had experts in on this. So what you want to do is it costs just a little bit more when you talk to your seed dealers. Make sure they get the cover crop seed tested for all the weeds for all 50 states. It costs just a little bit more, but it'll keep you out of trouble. And you got to be really careful if you're buying cover crop seed from some of the southern states and places where they have a lot of palmer. But anymore, it's just about everywhere. So you're really about the only thing you can do is make sure that you've got a really good seed test on there that lists everything out. And that would be my recommendation.
Does anybody know with ODA testing, how that works? Oh, answer, okay.
there you go.
Hit the microphone, Jan. Ann Dorrance there.
Hello, I'm Ann Dorrance, plant pathologist with Ohio State University. So Ohio Seed Improvement Association actually does all of the seed testing. ODA actually sends it over to there, and they do look at noxious weeds. So if in doubt, get a test. You know, that's kind of the simplest aims of protection.
So Ann, give us an update, Ann, on this potential replant. Some of these soybeans are been pretty bad. Are we going to get them through? Do we still replant? Any of those kind of comments?
Replanting. Well, I've been asking myself that same question after walking what I had hoped to do some fungicide trials on, so it's looking pretty poor. The rule of thumb is, though, and we've done this before too, if you were fortunate enough to get in the ground, it really only takes 100,000 plants per acre, right? And some of you have seen my seed treatment trial data. I don't plant till usually after Memorial Day, and then I flood it and do all sorts of terrible things to it. And I still get decent yields if we get decent rains after that. So I think there is a little bit of a rainbow there. If you're not, and you now want to go back in, we've got this July 15th deadline. That treated seed really does have to go on the ground, guys. I can't emphasize enough the poor quality of most of the seed that we had. Anything that's been in a grain bin is not going to be good. So even your bin run seed that wasn't traded isn't really good. So get that treated seed. Let's use up as much as it is. I don't think Brad kind of emphasized, if we didn't plant today, we were probably looking at 2 million bags of seed. If that went back to the companies, it would have to have been incinerated. Just think of that environmental hazard that would have made the presses, right? The other thing is, for ethanol plants, they can't be fed. The DGGs have to also be buried. So this is the best place for that seed is in the ground. So I just want to help emphasize that part.
Okay, thank you.
I want to add to Ann's comment about Ohio Seed Improvement first, then I have a question for the seed dealers. If a farmer wants to send in a sample to Ohio Seed Improvement, it needs to be sent into COST, which is the Central Ohio Seed Testing. It has to go there as a farmer. The Ohio Seed Improvement is for the dealers that are members of Ohio Seed Improvement. So as a farmer, if you want to send it in, a sample to be tested, it has to go to the COST program. Correct? Now, my question for the seed dealers, do you guys do any testing of your own once you get your products in to verify for noxious weeds? And then do you test eastern states?
We have done a lot of work with different covers, looking at just exactly what you're talking about. This year we have 15 different plots out in an interseeding scenario to see how these species are going to perform, and also see if there's any weeds that may be showing up that wasn't on the tag.
Dwight?
Well, Center Seeds has a very vigorous testing program, so I don't retest what they've done, but I know from talking to them what they do and go through. So I have a high level of confidence in the seed tags, and of course, by law, they've got to be accurate to the testing. So I'm more concerned about, I know last year there was a lot of poor quality things went out, old seed and off the farm seed to farmers. But I think most of your major cover crop companies are trying to do a good job and do the testing right.
So ditto, Cody?
Yeah, so
Okay.
if we get seed in from the outside, we retest it as well, just to verify it. It's peace of mind for us, peace of mind for you.
I think I'd like to take advantage of our audience, Randall. Haven't talked about oats. So Bob Hendershot and Gary Wilson, if we can get the mic there, Jan, I think that might be an option. Looking forage, looking cover crop, some of your experienced guys. No. I'm not sure how many grazers we have, but let's talk a little bit about oats, I guess.
Oats can be a decent cover. Now's not a good time to plant oats. Oats is very photosensitive, and with the day lengths long right now, oats are certainly going to germinate. They're going to emerge, but they'll probably only get 6-8 inches before they put a head on them. They'll just be very, very short. We have found that it's probably best to wait till the end of July, 1st of August, to plant oats from that regard. There's all kinds of oats out there. They're grain oats, Canadian oats, and there's forage oats, okay? And they're all a little bit different in relation to forage. The grain oats have the least leaves. Your Canadian oats will have an extra leaf, and your forage oats will even have an extra leaf on top of that. So your forage oats, if you're looking for forage, is always going to be the best. They may be a little bit more expensive, but they're going to be better forage. The forage oats are. But as far as the Canadian oats, those are the ones that all the feed mills use in the feeds. They don't have as much of a haul on those. So the horse people, they like them better. So all the feed mills are probably going to have that. I'm sure they're not going to have enough to sell for seed. They keep them for feed. Okay, there's a difference there. But there are oats around, but I'd be cautious about planting oats at this time of year.
So Bob, anything on grazing as we get into some of these oddities that people aren't used to, maybe?
Most of what we've talked about could be and can be grazed. It'll take some time for your animals to adapt to a new diet. So don't think you're going to turn them out on a field and let them graze a cover crop that they've never seen before. Understand animals learn to graze from their mother. And if mom never ate it, that offspring doesn't have a clue what it is. So since some of you guys, the first time you went to a Chinese restaurant, you were very tentative of what you ordered and what you, unless your mother took you there ahead of time as a boy and showed you or taught you what to eat. So the cows and sheep and goats are all the same. They need some time to adjust. But I agree with Gary, oats is a great thing. It will stay in the field even after it's frosted. It doesn't have to be green to be good. So even after it's died, it still will continue to be a good forage and graze. We've had farmers graze oats all winter long until the following spring. And cows were having calves out there on it. So it's a good feed to utilize. The roots are still in the ground, so it's a I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe somewhat more inexpensive than some as well.
Yes, most of the time the oats is the least cost alternative, but can't say this year what, if anything, will be least cost. But oats is a good,
maybe less cost.
Less cost. That's a good way. So.
Okay, I guess let's open it back up. You got a comment, Randall?
I was going to make a comment. You may have noticed we're not taking any breaks. We'll finish in an hour, but there's refreshments downstairs in case you missed those coming up. Liberty Bank providing cookies and drinks with help from the Ohio No-Till Council. Looks like we planned for quite a few people, so you can probably take a couple of cookies home with you too. But the main point is, if you need to get up and go to the restrooms, they're back there, so just do that on your own. we figured if we took a 10-minute break, there's no way everybody could get in and out in 10 minutes. So I just wanted to, while I got the microphone, on our website, and it's not up there anywhere, but we have one on our department at OSU, FABE events, specifically for this. There are some resources on there. There it is, the fourth line down, fabe.osu, et cetera. We put some resources on there. Cody sent us something. Dwight Clary sent us one. We have an NRCS document from Iowa that Sarah's telling me we better ignore that because recommendations in Iowa may not fit here. So we'll probably replace that one with something from Ohio State University. Am I right?
For NRCS.
NRCS?
Yeah, the NRCS
All right.
Ohio document.
Just those couple of little clarifications.
One other thing I wanted to add too is we've got a lot of great resources on the corn newsletter at agcrops.osu.edu. Additionally, and some of the things that Ann has talked about, additionally, FABE, they have those CTC videos, and if you're asking questions on the seed testing, there's a great panel video on there to check that out. But those are all resources. Do your homework as you're looking through these scenarios, and there's great resources out there for each one of you because every scenario is different.
I mentioned MCC.
Yeah, and then additionally, the Midwest Cover Crops Council, we're in the process of revising the cover crop tool selector. What is there is valid. It's mcc.msu.edu. You can get down to your county level looking at recommendations for cover crops. That is in the process, though, of being revised, and we're hoping to the end of July that the new revision will be out. But things that are on there now are still valid to use. And again, it gets down to your county level that you can use that.
Well, have we answered all your questions? How are we doing?
Curtis?
You want to make comments?
It's not so much a comment. I'm Curtis Young, Ohio State University Extension, Van Wert County Ag and Natural Resource Educator, Certified Crop Advisor, and it goes on. You just mentioned, agronomically speaking, you have to be careful when you plant oats. How many of our other cover crops may also have some hidden agronomic restrictions that we don't typically deal with because most of the time we're planting these cover crops after a successful crop. So are any of our other cover crops going to act funky if they get planted too early in the season?
Well, I think things you have to be careful with if you're trying to build a reserve of nitrogen in the soil, especially if you're using legumes that tend to flower 30 or 40 days after you plant them, then they will actually move that nodulation or the nitrogen they collected from the atmosphere out to make the seed. You know, a perfect example, and it's not a legume, is a buckwheat. About 35 days after you plant it, it's in white bloom. Another 4 days later, there's viable seed there, you know. So those are things you have to be aware of and cautious, and that's what you need to talk to your seed supplier that you're buying your cover crop from so he understands where you want to do it and when you want to do it, and he can do the right suggestions on how long it'll take till it blooms.
So to kind of bounce off that with buckwheat, we can kind of capture another opportunity with, say, sorghum Sudan, because when we cut sorghum Sudan, its root system just goes crazy. So we can kind of kill two birds with one stone. If we had a mix of, say, sorghum Sudan, radishes, and buckwheat, maybe some other things, if we went in there and clipped it, yes, it's another pass, it's another slight cost, but it's going to gain us some other benefits long term, and it'll take care of the seed issue for the buckwheat. So it's an option.
Dwight, have you ever planted radish this time of year? What'll happen?
Usually this is kind of the first year we've had prevent plant like this, but usually they're planted after wheat. One thing that you might find this year we'll be planting probably a fuzz earlier than normal, you may have some of this go to seed. Now, if you're very careful of the species you select, that's not a problem. It's kind of a free cover crop for you. You're going to plant green next spring, so if you get some buckwheat, a flush of buckwheat coming in the spring, it's easy to kill. So keep that in mind. And there's a lot of benefits to that. But you also, there's a trade-off, some of the things they were talking here about the nitrogen, but on the positive side, you're going to get a lot more massive root systems out there. The roots are going to do a lot more work. So sometimes there's a little bit of a trade-off on those things. But with a lot of farms with tight soils and compaction from all this heavy rainfall and maybe guys getting on their fields too wet, that's probably a good thing.
Just a couple things. Thinking agronomically for next year, we have a tremendous head scab crop out there. So one thing that worries me big time is obviously wheat, triticale, rye, they all get head scab. So I'm worried about the do-it-yourself cover crop. Some folks mentioned, can we use our own seed, not cleaned seed, to reseed a cover crop? I think that's a big risk to just perpetuating that disease cycle. So that might be one of the benefits of looking for a cleaned seed and purchasing your seed on the rye side. And then one of the things that we noticed when I was back at Kansas State with a Sudan grass cover crop was the following year we had to increase nitrogen for both a corn and a grain sorghum crop. So it's a fantastic crop for pulling up nutrients, but it does like to hold on to that nitrogen. So if you are going to go into a Sudan crop, Sudan grass or Sudex or one of those, you may actually need to increase your nitrogen rate like you would for corn on corn. That nitrogen, as long as you leave the residue there, will eventually come back, but it takes a couple years compared to some of the other cover crops.
What about planting winter annuals too early? Is there concern? Wheat, soil, rye, all those.
Yeah.
Next week.
Rape would be another one probably. That's on the family of canola. And I know when we raised canola, there was a window of late August, early September. So some of those, if you get them out too early, they may not overwinter. And if you have a really good multi-species blend, they may function for you this year and not overwinter. Peas are another one. If you have peas in a blend, winter pea, you can do two things. You get it out there early, it can go through its life cycle, do its thing and be done with. If you get it out there at the right time in the fall, it could potentially overwinter for you. So there are trade-offs. I like the diversity for stimulating biology. One of the things is you hear all the time when you go talk to your seed guy, have some goals in mind, and that's where you want to start. But a good seed salesman will take those goals and he'll say, okay, and here's the other benefits you're going to get from this. And so there's many more benefits or points of return on your investment that we don't often think about, where an experienced seed salesman will know and be able to help you with those things.
So to go along and dovetail in with that, folks, if you're new at growing cover crops, just be cautious. If you aren't familiar with planting green in the spring and what's involved in that, please get some professional advice so that, I don't want to see you plant 1,000 acres of rye and then have rye this high next spring and you got no idea what you're doing in there. It can be done, but if you haven't ever done it, you want to talk about stressful, man, when rye gets away from you. So maybe in that case, you want to use oats or something that dies and gave you that benefit, but you won't have to fight that green in the spring. And it's like they're saying, whatever your goals are, that's okay, but just be cautious if you haven't ever dealt with it before, because you can let yourself into a real nightmare if your planter isn't equipped or you're not equipped or your sprayer doesn't show up when it's supposed to, or you get into a spring like this where it didn't matter.
Well, one thing that we do at our facility, and I think these guys here do too probably, but when you buy a blend from me or something like that, I work through you with the whole program. I have a management plan for you in place. I tell you how to establish it, how to manage it, how to terminate it, and I tell everybody, you call me anytime with questions. So we're not just, that's why I said earlier, get yourself a full-service cover crop seed dealer out here, somebody with experience, because they'll work you through the whole system. And there's a lot of companies out here, not to put them down, but have just gotten into cover crops, and their salespeople don't have the experience behind it. So you want to work with somebody that's going to educate you on the whys and why nots, and how to do things through the whole process, even into your next grain production crop. That's important. And if you have somebody to work with you, that eliminates a lot of the mistakes, because, you know, we've been doing this a long time ourselves. I've made mistakes, so now I can say to you, don't do that. But that's pretty important, especially when you're investing money and starting to learn a new system.
Okay, we have
All right, you got a
another
question over here.
We're getting close to wheat harvest here, and with, like you mentioned, the head scab is pretty prevalent, and we're kind of suspecting a lot of vomitoxin or other toxins in with that wheat, and some of that could get rejected. Would that be a decent, could that be used for a cover crop seed? If so, or if not, what's your reasons behind it?
Yes, please.
Okay, Ann.
Nobody's arguing that.
So we hear you, and I think that Pierce has already put some things out. So on this wheat that's filled with head scab, hopefully your resistant varieties held up, and so we not like it would have been 10 years ago. So there's a little bit of lemonade, right? Turn the fans up. Really, because the kernels with head scab are really tiny and shriveled, and they'll be lighter weight. So turn the fans up, open up the louvers, and just blow that stuff back out on the ground, all right? The seed that is gone to head scab is not going to germinate. And there's enough Fusarium graminearum around all our crops. It infects all of our crops, corn, soybean. It's a big seedling disease pathogen as well, and wheat. So that's not going to go anyplace, and it's all going to be on the residue. I don't know if you've ever walked through the fields and seen the old corn kernels, and they're black now. Those are from all the fruiting structures of the head scab organism. So if you use that wheat as seed, most of it's going to just rot because it's going to be infected. So you're going to have to get a germ test if you're going to use it, just to see what quality it is before you use it. I think that's the best advice. But to get the best crop, get it also out of the fields as quickly as possible. Once that Fusarium graminearum is growing in those kernels, it's going to continue into harvest until it's totally dried down. So, and as it's growing, it's going to keep producing the vomitoxin. So get it dry, keep it dry, and that'll stop the pathogen. These things don't work once it gets hot and dry. It's kind of like if you bake it in an oven. So just keep it dry, and then that'll stop that vomitoxin, and then get it in as soon as you can.
I'm concerned with planting wheat before the fly-free date, because it might bring a lot of problems to your neighbor's crops, your crops, if you're gonna plant wheat this fall. You know, when you go planting wheat in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're just inviting insects to come and lay in that residue of those cereal crops that can create problems for us next year.
Yeah. Well, I was answering his question as if he would plant after the fly-free date. Yes. So you're exactly right. Barley yellow dwarf, aphids, yes. That will just bring us a whole other load of problems. The other thing is, as we keep continuously plant, there were some of these questions about rye going after rye. There's take-all disease. There's all sorts of things that will keep a pathologist busy once we start continuous cropping. So I don't want to add to the stress, but just let me tell you, I have enough to do, so don't do that.
Any other questions?
I'd like to add something here. As a general rule, I don't like wheat as a cover crop in the first place, whether disease or not. It's better than nothing, but we can do so much better. But with these times the way they are, I understand guys want to use wheat that might potentially be like that. I understand what they're saying about planting soybeans because of the seed treatment on them and the bad germ that's potential, but that's another one that I typically don't like to plant as a cover crop, because these tend to, like Dave was saying, when you plant those types of plants, you're carrying diseases and insects, and you're giving them a habitat to carry forward into your next grain crop. So I try to avoid using those things as a cover crop.
Well, since we're on the topic of wheat, one of the issues usually we see all the time is when we have these tough economic times, guys usually for cash flow purposes, they'll start to put wheat in the rotation again where they might not otherwise. And so I'm getting this question quite often. What happens if I had cereal rye out there and I've got all this seed out there and I plant wheat into it? Well, you're going to get a crop of both cereal rye and wheat. So I'm going to have Jeff help me with this a little bit. Maybe. What can we use to get rid of that cereal rye out of the wheat? Let's say, maybe before it comes up, and then what if all of a sudden we got a big bunch of cereal rye in after the wheat comes up? So that's really a two-part question.
Well, certainly we can put burn down herbicides on in advance of the wheat planting and the emergence of the wheat to help get rid of anything that is already there. If it germinates after the point, I don't think there's any herbicides that we can...
An idea that was floated, I'll let you answer this, is can we dig out those old rope wicks that we used to use? Because cereal rye grows higher than the wheat. Can we rope wick it?
Yeah, sure, that would be a viable option.
Okay. I'm just asking. Depends on where the leaf is. So, yeah, guys, grab some of that old equipment you got in the barn you haven't used for years. Some of these younger folks might not know what that is anymore.
If you have a choice of another field to plant, I would say from a risk point of view, I would never try to plant wheat after a field of cereal rye, not just because of the volunteer, but again, because of disease issues. You're going to have a lot of straw out there that could potentially carry insects and diseases forward. You're planting a cereal grain against a cereal grain.
Grass on the grass. Okay, yeah, one question back there.
Quick comment, if you're planting buckwheat, this year has been very difficult on the honeybees collecting enough nectar. And there's many individuals that are professional beekeepers, part-time beekeepers, that are afraid they will not have enough stores in their hives for survive the winter. Planting buckwheat, give the Ohio Beekeepers Association a email, tell them, hey, I got some buckwheat out here. Guys want to set hives out here, fine. You might get 2 or 3 gallons of buckwheat honey. And then the other question that spiked up with regards to Sudan grass and nitrogen. What if we seeded something like the Cody, as I'm looking at the brochure, the fixation and Balsana clover or the frosty crimson clover for winter cover? Would that offset that nitrogen sucking of the tie-up of the Sudan and grass?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. Or you could put sun hemp. Any type of legume out there is going to help to offset that. I mean, that's just basic carbon and nitrogen ratio balancing there, and so that should definitely help things out next spring for you.
If you're using sorghum Sudan, you can use a cowpea.
Yeah.
The cowpea is a great sister to that. It'll grow in the same kind of conditions that the sorghum grows in, hot, no rainfall event. Some of the other clovers or legumes doesn't respond very well with the competition from the sorghum Sudan.
Okay, so this, you would recommend, if you do a sorghum Sudan mix, to include cowpeas or sun hemp or something like that, even if it's coming off the side?
Yes. Yes.
Just remember what else they said earlier, folks. Sorghum Sudan's in short supply.
Right.
So,
Okay.
Sun hemp is also has very good feed value.
Okay, we got a funny looking thing up here, Mark. What's going on?
Yeah, before we get too close to the end of the program, we want to give you a little time to do this. We'd like your feedback on tonight's program, on whether or not it answered a lot of your questions or not, what kind of questions you might have from this point on that we can be working on to help you with your operation. We only have 100 copies of the paper. For those of you that have a smartphone, you can take a picture of that, what's called a QR code, and your smartphone will know what to do with it. It'll take you to a website where you can answer the questions online. But we would appreciate it if you would do that tonight before you leave. If you don't have a smartphone, you can fill the paper copy out and turn it in at the end of the evening. And also, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to Hardin County and for this meeting tonight. And stay tuned to the Corn newsletter. We're coming out with new recommendations for using soybeans as a cover crop. That will probably be in next week, maybe. So this week was the recommendations for using corn as a cover crop. So make sure you check that out. Like Sarah said, eggcrops.osu.edu or corn.osu.edu.
And I'll add,
Yeah, while we're thanking people, I don't think I mentioned earlier that once we started this last Thursday, Dave Delafield, who manages the McIntosh Center, and he's sitting back here in the corner managing the microphones up here right now, he put all this together for us, including the microphones, and he's managing the sound system. But I want to put out a special note that the usual rent on this, I think, is $300 for this room. And I got a note from Dave last night that the president of Ohio Northern University, the president's office, is going to cover that for us tonight. So that's a nice, generous offer from, yes, applaud. So I wanted to make sure we recognize Dave Delafield and Ohio Northern and how great they are to work with on this meeting at the last minute, as well as programs like Conservation Tillage Conference that we hold every year.
Mention the August meeting then. The field date, August.
Oh, August 29th. Norman Browsey, is Norm here? Did he have to leave? Oh, here he is. Nathan, what did I say, Norman? Oh, geez. So many names. Stand up, Nathan. Browsey, Crawford County. Tell a little bit about what you've got. I think you got most of your acres planted, but we're going to have cover crops, and what else are we going to have there?
Okay, well, we did get probably 2/3 of the stuff planted, and we have some oats we're taking off, and we're going to have some cover crops there. We do all no-till. You'll see some corn that was planted into some cover crops, and we'll probably have some pits there. You can look at some different root structures and stuff like that. So looking forward to everybody coming, and hope to see you all there. Thanks.
All right. Dave, remind me who the key speaker is going to be. Is that Rick Clark?
Rick Clark, yes.
Rick Clark.
Western Indiana.
And he's regenerative no-till agriculture is the main thing that he's working on. I don't know if any of us have talked to him. I don't know how well he's doing this spring. But anyway, he has a long history and is very prominent in no-till circles around the Midwest.
So maybe Randall, at this time, any of our panel have anything burning that didn't get accomplished or shared? If not, I think. Right?
Just one last thing, we don't need any more weed seeds.
Randall had wanted us to talk a little bit about equipment planting cover crops. One of the things when you work with your seed dealer is when I work with somebody, I find out what their equipment is, because that depends on what they plant and maybe when they plant and how they plant. So everybody has a different pieces of equipment. So that's the consideration you want to take there is in how you plant things. But it's all workable. It's all workable.
Any other comments here? Cody?
I'd add one comment about using soybeans for cover crop. There could be two different goals. So just like the legumes for cover crop, same thing applies to soybean. If your objective is to fixate nitrogen, then utilize a later maturity soybean that's not going to reach pod set, because that way the nitrogen fixates and not moved up to the pods. If your goal is for a forage, then obviously you want some pods on there to add protein to the feed content.
Well, you got seed left over, you gotta get rid of it, so.
That's right.
So use that as a percentage of a mix, maybe?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Well, Randall, if we.
How many livestock producers are out here right now that actually have livestock that you're worried about for forage and feed? What I do want you to know is that there is under the Farm Bill, and there has been under the last 2 Farm Bills, a permanent disaster title for ELAP, Emergency Livestock Assistance. For those of you that do graze or have any grazing, even though you don't have a loss on grazing, or you may have a loss on grazing, you would qualify as long as you have grazed livestock for ELAP, and you need to make that application within the period that you detect a loss, which obviously is out there for your most available feed. And at that point, you can qualify for purchase feed for up to 120 days. So make certain that if you are experiencing that, or you're selling as you're trying to raise these different types of what might be used for livestock, and the 2 different goals here, that in fact that there would be receipts, and that for folks that are purchasing, that you turn that in under the ELAP program.
All right, I think a question we had on the screen there was what can you get for $20 an acre? And you remember early, I think it was Dave, maybe Dwight agreed with it, that you can't afford not to plant a cover crop. Now, you just told me you can't do any mix for $20, so let's have the 3 of them. Just give an example of what they would get and what the price would be. Dave, Dwight, and Cody.
All right, it's really tough to get a cover crop to cost $20 because the seeding rates are going to be fairly low. We can do it, but then you don't have enough ground cover to suppress the weeds. And that's one thing we try to make sure that we have enough cover in a mix to have suppression of the weeds that's going to be there during the growing season. Because once you use a various different types of cover, that means there's no herbicides that we can put on there that don't take something out, An example for a relatively cheap one would probably be either some rye at probably 15 pounds or less, maybe a little crimson clover and a little lanza, that would give them 2. And that would be where I'd go to bean or corn, If you're thinking about beans, I would look at rye or oats in that 30-pound range with a brassica and maybe a pound of the balanza clover because the balanza will grow in the wet holes where the rye and the rest of the stuff won't. So, as you go to more species, you add 8 or 10, they're going to be in that $25 to $35 range of those covers. So, Dwight?
Well, I put together some blends for this prevent plant, and I tried to keep the cost down, and it's a job. It's a job. But most of the blends we have are probably in the mid-20s, and I agree with Dave, you've got to have enough seed. I would like to emphasize that. A lot of times I'll hear guys say, I planted a cover crop for X amount of dollars, and I know from experience what they did was they cut back on their seeding rate. So let's look at the whole picture here. Your land cost, your chemical cost, your equipment cost, that all stays the same. Your main variable is your seed cost. So if you cut back 4 pounds, 5 pounds of seed, the cost of that seed in the scheme of the whole program is the lowest cost part of that system. So you're stepping over a dime to pick up a penny. And so just like our grain crops, we don't want to overseed, but we want to have the maximum proper population. That'll give you the best return on your investment on all those points of return that I talked about earlier, whether it's nutrient uptake, nitrogen production, producing organic matter, the list goes on. So you want to look at your cover crop as a crop. You're growing a crop. And so that's one thing I'd say.
Good stuff. So I guess to take this a step further, especially with the NRCS program getting rolled out and all these prevent plant acres, we talked earlier, our supply is decent right now, but if we have this massive influx, seed could go pretty quick. So I guess my suggestion to you folks would be to make sure you have backup plans in place and work with your seed supplier to make sure they can get you a backup plan if something does sell out. So that's one other consideration as well.
Substitute.
Yep, absolutely.
I know a comment from Dave Brandt I've heard a number of times. Always add a pound, I think it is, of sunflower seeds. It's based on rented acres, because that'll make your landlady or landlord happy, and they'll look at it as being flowers rather than weeds. So that's a key point too. Alan?
Well, I think we're ready to wrap up, are we?
There, one other,
Okay.
is that me? Hey, I'll jump in here real quick. So we heard about soybeans. One thing you got to be a little careful with, if you're going to harvest or if you're going to take the soybeans for hay, if you got pods in them, and Bob and Gary back me up on this, you get tryptophan, and that's not good for grazing or for as a forage. So you might want to just be a little careful. You want to probably get that harvested again September 1st, but you got to get it before the pods come on, because that can be a problem, right, Gary? Okay, good. Just make sure you guys are aware of that.
Question right here.
Okay. What I've gathered here is we got a lot of tall weeds. Co-ops couldn't get into field, and then when they could, they're spraying the beans and corn, so our prevent plant is big and weedy. And I realize something growing is best for biologicals. But now when we spray, we're going to be 30 to 60 days with bare soil to get, or do we have to go seed something twice so we can get something growing earlier on this bare soil to keep the biologicals before we can go with our more traditional later fall or later August?
Who you asking? Jeff may have a comment on that.
That's the conundrum we're in right now, and we.
Well, if you're using Roundup and Liberty, there's no answer, because it takes everything out you want to plant. It'll take the grass out, it'll take the rye, the wheat, the barley, whatever you plant, and the Liberty then will take out, or the Roundup will take out everything else.
Roundup and 2,4-D, that would
Yeah.
take out all the weeds.
That would take out the weeds, but it wouldn't quite have the residual. You still have that 30-day residual.
Yeah, 30 days, so
Yeah.
I guess some of that they sprayed earlier has been 30 days.
Yeah.
On the prevent.
And 30 days from now, still all right to plant a cover crop, because that way you may keep it from wanting to translocate those nodules to the seed, because it'll be later and it won't have a chance to mature.
About the end of July or first
So August is a good time, yes.
Something I would add to that, though, as I had mentioned earlier, I understand what you're saying is you don't want that out there 30 days with not anything growing on it.
I mean, that's the.
Right. So that goes back to my comment earlier that because this is a unique situation, we may have some trade-offs. In my opinion, I'd rather have it planted early and have that growing and cover, and maybe have a few species that don't perform to their full potential, but still have them out there, but have that ground covered. Otherwise, if you wait 30 days, there's a good chance you're gonna get a whole nother flush of weeds coming, and you gotta go through that whole process again. So my suggestion is get a good mix and do things in the right management steps, and then get it planted.
Yeah, just remember that limitation, because if
Yep.
you're gonna use the 2,4-D and the dicamba, then you can't really go in there. And again, if you're gonna plant the cover crop as a forage, you've got legal issues with the Liberty. Okay, so you gotta consider that. I mean, scientifically, there's nothing wrong with planting right after Liberty, but there's legal issues with residues.
Could I ask a question about that? If they're using 2,4-D this time of year when it's hot and humid, isn't that kind of a risk too about drifting and stuff?
That's a good thing that hasn't been brought up, and we do need to worry about the temperatures that we have right now to increase volatility, especially with dicamba, so we need to be cognizant of what other crops and vegetables are around our fields. In some cases, there's a little less risk where we've got areas that have almost nothing planted, but we still have homeowners that have gardens that we need to be concerned about with volatility. The 2,4-D ester, is the best for weed control, but is more volatile than the amine formulation. So you've got to take that into consideration with these warm temperatures right now, so thanks for adding that.
Jeff, if we clip the weeds and allow them to regrow, how effective are these herbicides at killing versus the tall weeds?
So the question is what about clipping the weeds off first and then coming back in with the herbicide? Is that?
Yeah, after they started to regrow.
I think that's, as far as the age of the plant is concerned, it's still old. And so it's going to be hard to kill even with that new regrowth that I can think of. That's the way I'm looking at it anyways. I hope that that's the right way. But the plant's old. I mean, it's going to be old and it's going to be still hard to control.
You're probably adding some stress to it too with the clipping. It's going to have to recover from that, and that's going to take more time. So it's not going to take the herbicide in as well either.
Just some firsthand experience. You talked about learning lessons. If you mow giant ragweed and then you disc it, it will come back. So I think if you had to do something, I would, I don't want to say work ground in a room like this in these hallowed halls, but spray first, then work the ground. Never stress the weed out first because you're not going to get it.
All right. Issues too. I mean, you don't have a leaf surface if you mow it. Right. Then still got that big fat root down there.
Okay, we had a question back here. Let's go there first.
Yes. Different problem, no weeds, but a good cereal crop. And I don't think we really got a good answer for the fellow that had 25 to 50 bushel of cereal rye that something has to be done with or put down on the ground to germinate. My question is, can any other species be even put down that the cereal rye is not going to choke out? Are we just stuck with a real good stand of cereal rye?
Yeah.
I say stuck, we'll have good weed control.
In a lot of cases, I'd say that's your most economical choice, and then go to beans in that the next year.
Roll it.
Roll.
Roll it somehow.
Manage your cereal rye at that rate, you're right, nothing else is gonna grow. Well, you don't want, I would not, I would put beans in there.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
One other thing with that to think about, and Mark, you might be able to help with this. If you're an equip, that could throw kind of a wrench in things. If you've got a bunch of rye out there right now and you're in an equip contract, what do I do? You might still be obligated to put a cover crop out, seed a cover crop. Any thoughts on that?
So if you're, let me clarify the question, are you asking if you've got an existing equip contract and you're planning, you've got a contract item to seed cover crop again next year?
Yes.
Okay. So we can modify that contract forward to where that, you can move that seeding of the cover crop to the following year since you've got one there for free. And, work with your local DC, because every contract is different and every contract is specific. So work with your local district conservationist and we'll move forward with that.
I don't have any experience with it because we've always been able to have rye that we've killed, so, it hasn't been a thing like we see this year, but my personal opinion would be I'd lay it down. I'd lay it down as soon as possible, get those heads down on the ground, let it sprout back up. Then if you want, if you get it all sprouted before October 1st, you could take it out with a herbicide and not have to worry too much, I think if you I'd take a 35-foot telephone pole and drag it behind a tractor, lay it down. I don't want to spend $80,000 for a crop roller,
On these chemical labels, do we need to be looking at crops or should we be looking under the fallow sections in these labels?
Not all the companies are looking at it equally, but what Mark Laux has said is that we should make sure that the herbicides have a fallow label if we're going to use it as a fallow herbicide is the best way to do that. because we have to be concerned about residuals into next year. I know one thing somebody pointed out last week was, what about atrazine? Atrazine would give us a lot of residual control right now, but you have to plant corn next year. And there is a fallow label to do that, but you have to plant corn next year because we're too late in the season for anything else. So you have to know what the rotation is of anything that you're planning to use to keep the field weed free, but then we're not planting anything green in it. The crop rotation restrictions are in the weed control guide, yes.
All right, I got a question over here.
Under prevent plant, is there any limitations on not putting farm drainage in?
You can tile if you want to.
And I got another one right here.
I guess one question I have on the cereal rye issue, if you've got a stand of cereal rye that was a cover crop, couldn't you roll that up or bale it and sell it as bedding? I had a producer contact me a couple of weeks ago and said that he was paying $240 a ton for bedding material right now because there wasn't any available.
You're talking about on a prevent plant acreage, is that what you're on, or just in general?
In general, or either or.
I mean, during the late plant period, you can bale it. So late plant period's over for corn, but late plant period still exists today for beans through the 15th. So that is something that you still can bale, that cover crop there. You can bale it, hay it, graze it through the 15th. But yeah, that's the answer.
There was the question or comment about can you go ahead and put in a drainage system on prevent plant? I think I've heard this for a number of years. Go ahead and put in a cover crop, and then go ahead and put in your tile at every 40 feet. In other words, you'll get the benefit of the cover crop. Sure, you'll mess it up a little bit, but that's a lot better than having bare ground or weeds out there between the tile.
And you get it ditched.
I'd like to make a comment about the herbicides again. A lot of herbicide labels don't cover most cover crop seeds. And so I suggest to producers who've used herbicides to go to that label and look and see if you can plant, say, alfalfa or, say, Timothy grass, a forage, because a lot of them have done research on forages, but they haven't done it on cover crops. So if you can grow an alfalfa plant or a Timothy grass or something like that, it's pretty safe. You can grow most of your cover crops. So you may not be able to find out the exact information on an individual species, but you can get a general idea from approaching it like that.
One other thing on herbicide strategy, Penn State has an excellent resource. If you are formulating your cover crop mix, it'd definitely be something good to verify if you have any herbicide concerns. They basically have a giant list of herbicides and then what cover crops those herbicides might affect and what might not. So that'd be a good resource to check out. And maybe Ohio State has something like that too, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we don't have anything currently, but the University of Missouri also has some nice tables also to demonstrate what the effect is on some of them, and that is due to some research, whereas Penn State is a mix of research and label searches.
And I'll just add one more, that's Wisconsin. I think the latest date is 2015, but they have an excellent table that has all the half-lives in it. And so you can see what, you can go right down the list and look at what you're using, and then it'll tell you what crops you can and cannot plant as far as cover crops. So I think all three of those resources, I've got all three and use all three of them together.
Another thing to add on this cover crop, if your intent is for grain or seed with any of your cover crops, that absolutely affects if it's on prevented plant, it absolutely affects your payments on those. Some it eliminates 100%, and some it reduces it. So I don't care if it's after late plant, during plant, or after the 1st of September or before, or whatever. Those are definitely something that to exclude out. I mean, you just make sure you talk to someone about that if that was your intent for seed or grain.
Well, Jan, we got to that witching hour yet?
That's what I was just going to say. First of all, we want to thank you for coming. This was put together on short notice, like Randall reiterated, and I think we put together an amazing group of people here for resource people on 2 or 3 days' notice. So thank you for coming. If you would, please thank our resource folks. If you want to ask a question of them personally, they'll be around for a little bit, I'm sure. Make sure you take a couple of cookies downstairs. There's lots of cookies. I think if we hadn't had the nice weather show up here a couple days ago, when we started playing this last week, the water was running across the street over here. So, you know, the nice weather probably reduced our turnout some, but OCJ was nice enough and sponsored to come and put it online for folks that couldn't make it. And thanks to everybody.
So Mark, you get your evaluations when you leave those green sheets. We'd like. Thank you.
Travel safe.
Stand up.
Meanwhile, grains were higher today with corn trade 2 to 3 cents higher with light buying action following the lead of soybeans. Soybean trade 7 to 9.
Ohio. For generations, Ohio has been known for its agriculture. It's a reputation that's been earned through hard work. It wasn't easy for previous generations, and it's not easy today. To help build a better future, Ohio farmers turn to the same partner they've counted on in the past, the Ohio Farm Bureau.